True change begins when we listen to the stories behind simple words. Words on their own can seem ordinary, but within them often lie emotions, memories, and unspoken truths that have the power to transform hearts. The billionaire in this story had heard thousands of words in his lifetime, words of praise, business deals, negotiations, and promises. But none of them had ever truly reached him. They were noise, part of the world he had built around profit and control. Yet on one quiet evening in a small diner, a few simple words from a waitress, "Serve me one last meal," pierced through everything he thought he knew. It wasn't the words themselves that changed him. It was the story behind them, the pain, the hope, and the quiet strength they carried. The billionaire had spent years believing that power came from speaking, from being the loudest voice in the room, from giving orders and making others listen. He had forgotten how to hear, how to pause long enough to understand the meaning hidden between the lines. The waitress, on the other hand, had lived a life where listening was second nature. Every customer who sat at her counter came with their own story, some lonely, some broken, some chasing dreams that had long slipped away. She learned to listen not just with her ears, but with her heart. That was the difference between them. When she asked him to serve her one last meal, it wasn't a demand. It was a quiet plea that carried the weight of years spent putting others first, of dreams put aside for responsibility, of a heart still capable of giving despite the exhaustion. Her words were small, but they held a world of meaning. For the first time, the billionaire didn't respond with logic or questions. He simply listened. And in that act of listening, something inside him shifted. He began to realize that true connection doesn't come from speaking grand ideas, but from hearing the truth that lives within someone else's story. As she spoke, he saw her differently. He saw the lines on her hands, the weariness in her smile, and the gentleness in her voice. Each detail told a story of resilience. She didn't complain or seek sympathy. She simply shared pieces of her life, her memories of working late nights, of caring for others, of finding small joys in simple things. The billionaire had spent his life surrounded by people who used words to impress or manipulate, but hers were honest, unguarded, and real. That authenticity drew him in. Listening to her, he realized how rare it was to meet someone who spoke from the heart without expecting anything in return. He began to reflect on his own journey, how many people he had ignored, how many stories he had dismissed simply because they didn't benefit him. In business, he had learned to filter words through profit. In life, he had learned to avoid emotion. Now, hearing the waitress's story, he understood that every person carries experiences that shape who they are. Listening to her made him aware of the world beyond his own. It was humbling to realize how little he knew about the struggles of those who lived outside his walls of wealth. The simplicity of her words became a mirror to his own silence. For years, he had silenced his emotions, convinced that vulnerability was weakness. But as she talked about her life, her dreams that faded, her hope that never died, he began to feel something stir within him. Her story reminded him of the person he used to be before money hardened him, before success became his shield. He remembered the young man who once cared about people, who believed in kindness, who wanted to make a difference. That part of him, buried under years of ambition, began to breathe again. Listening is often underestimated, yet it is one of the most powerful forms of connection. It demands presence, patience, and empathy. The billionaire found himself learning this lesson in the simplest way possible, by being quiet. For once, he wasn't trying to solve or control anything. He was just there, hearing her speak, and in that quiet exchange, something extraordinary happened. He didn't just hear her story, he felt it. He felt the weight of her sacrifices, the warmth of her humanity, and the beauty of her resilience. It wasn't pity he felt, but admiration, a deep respect for a woman who faced life's hardships with grace and dignity. Her story wasn't filled with grand events or dramatic twists. It was made of ordinary struggles that most people overlook. But it was in that ordinariness that he found meaning. He realized that true change doesn't always begin with big decisions or major events. Sometimes it begins in a quiet diner, with a few simple words that open your eyes to what you've been too blind to see. Her words were a window into a world he had forgotten existed, one where compassion mattered more than profit, where people supported one another not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The more he listened, the more he understood that every person he passed by in his daily life carried a hidden story just like hers. The janitor, the driver, the cashier, All of them had worlds within them, unseen and unheard. He wondered how many lives he had brushed past without realizing their depth. That realization hit him harder than any business loss ever could. It was then that he grasped the truth. The greatest privilege isn't wealth, but the ability to truly hear another person's story. Her simple words taught him that empathy doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from presence, from showing up, from giving someone the gift of being heard. The more he listened, the more he found meaning in his own silence. The waitress's story began to dissolve the emptiness he carried. Through her, he rediscovered the beauty of humanity, the quiet strength that exists in every act of endurance, every whispered dream, every moment of kindness. Listening to her didn't just change how he saw her, it changed how he saw himself. He realized that the world was full of stories waiting to be heard, and that by opening his heart he could find purpose again. The waitress's simple request became a turning point, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. It reminded him that every word, no matter how small, carries the power to awaken compassion in those who truly listen. In the end, this story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful changes begin in the quietest moments. A few simple words spoken from the heart can touch places that success and wealth never reach. When we take the time to truly listen, not just with our ears but with our hearts, we open the door to understanding, empathy, and transformation. Because in every person we meet, there's a story waiting to be heard, and sometimes that story is exactly what we need to change our own. Sometimes a single moment, a few words spoken from the heart, can change the course of an entire life. Imagine a billionaire CEO, a man who has everything money can buy, walking into a small, quiet diner one last time. He expects just another meal, another ordinary evening. But this night, something is different. The waitress who serves him, tired but kind, makes a simple, heartfelt request. "Serve me one last meal." Those words, so unexpected, stop him in his tracks. What begins as a routine dinner turns into an unforgettable encounter, one that will challenge his values, awaken his emotions, and remind him that even the richest hearts can be starving for something real. A single act of kindness can awaken a heart lost in wealth. In a world where money and power seem to solve everything, kindness often becomes the rarest currency. People who have everything sometimes forget the value of simple gestures, of genuine emotion, of moments that don't come with a price tag. The billionaire in this story had built his life around success. Every decision he made was logical, every relationship transactional, and every goal driven by profit. He had the world at his feet, yet something within him remained hollow. He was surrounded by luxury, but not warmth. He had followers, but no friends. He had admirers, but no one who truly cared. And then one night, in a small diner far away from the skyscrapers and boardrooms, a simple act of kindness began to change everything. The waitress who served him wasn't someone the world would notice. She lived a quiet life, working long shifts to make ends meet, yet she carried something that no amount of money could buy: compassion. Her eyes still reflected warmth despite the struggles she faced every day. She didn't see herself as extraordinary, but her heart had a depth that could touch even the coldest soul. When the billionaire walked in that evening, she noticed more than his expensive suit and polished shoes. She saw a man tired beyond measure, someone who looked full on the outside but empty within. And so, she did what she always did best. She treated him not as a customer, but as a person. For the billionaire, the encounter started like any other. He ordered his meal, barely looked up and checked his phone while waiting. To him, the waitress was just another face, part of a world he rarely noticed. But as she served him, she spoke with warmth, asked how his day was, and smiled in a way that wasn't forced or calculated. It was a small gesture, but it caught him off guard. He couldn't remember the last time someone had asked how he was without wanting something in return. Her kindness wasn't grand or dramatic, it was human. That simplicity unsettled him in the most profound way. He found himself coming back to the diner the next day, and then again after that. He told himself it was the food, but deep down it was the feeling. For the first time in years, someone made him feel seen. The waitress didn't know his name, his company, or his fortune. She treated him the same way she treated everyone, with respect, patience, and genuine care. That consistency began to melt something inside him. Her kindness was like a mirror, reflecting everything he had lost touch with. It reminded him of who he was before the world turned him into a symbol of success. Then came the night when everything changed. The diner was quiet, the clock ticking softly in the background, when she made an unusual request. "Serve me one last meal." The billionaire didn't understand at first. He was used to people asking him for favors, money, or influence, but never something so humble, so deeply personal. Her words carried a quiet sorrow, and he could feel the weight behind them. Without knowing why, he agreed. That night, as he prepared a simple meal under her guidance, he realized how strange it felt to give instead of take. Each movement, each small action, filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The act was simple, cooking a meal for someone, but it awakened something deep inside him. He began to remember what kindness felt like when it wasn't tied to expectation or reward. The waitress didn't ask for anything more than that one meal, and that purity shook him. Her gratitude was genuine, her smile soft and content. It was as though, in that moment, they had traded places. The billionaire found himself serving, and in doing so, he rediscovered the meaning of humility. Kindness, he realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through the smallest of gestures, a smile, a helping hand, a shared silence. It doesn't ask for attention. It simply gives. That night, the billionaire stayed long after the diner closed, listening as the waitress talked about life, about struggle, about the beauty in ordinary moments. For someone who had spent his life chasing what was extraordinary, those simple words became priceless. They broke through the walls he had built and reminded him that happiness isn't bought, it's felt. As the days passed, he couldn't shake the impact of that evening. He started noticing people again, the janitor who greeted him every morning, the assistant who worked late hours without complaint, the driver who waited patiently in the cold. He began to see kindness not as weakness but as strength. It takes courage to care in a world that often rewards indifference. The waitress's compassion had reminded him that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the goodness one gives to others. Her one small act, a meal, a smile, a moment of connection, had woken up something long asleep in him. He started making changes quietly at first. He spoke more softly to his employees, took time to listen, and even visited the diner again, not as a customer but as a friend. Every time he looked at the waitress, he saw the lesson she had unknowingly taught him, that even the smallest act of kindness can ripple into something far greater. For the waitress, kindness was a habit. For him, it became a revelation. That difference made him realize how starved the world was for empathy. He had spent so many years chasing success, yet a single moment of humanity from someone with nothing to gain had given him more fulfillment than any victory ever had. A single act of kindness can awaken a heart lost in wealth because kindness cuts through what money builds: pride, isolation, fear. It reminds people that no matter how high they rise, they are still human. For the billionaire, that realization didn't come through a grand event or a dramatic twist. It came through a meal shared in silence, a simple gesture that asked for nothing but gave everything. It reminded him that true richness lies not in possessions, but in the connections we nurture. The warmth of that one act stayed with him long after the night ended, echoing in every part of his life that had once been cold and untouched by feeling.